Welcome back to Commodity Champions. And due to growing global focus on the green transition, countries are trying to move towards renewables. But the key question to ask is, are they meeting their net zero targets? Where do big corporates stand in reducing their carbon footprint? Is there a need for policy intervention? I am now joined by Anish Dey, the Global Head for Energy, Natural Resources and Chemical Sector at KPMG International. Also with us is Michael Hayes, Partner and Global Head for Renewables at KPMG in Ireland. Gentlemen, hi, thank you so much for joining us on this broadcast. Anish, to you first. And what is the market share of renewables in the fuel basket as of now? I do understand that you've just concluded your annual program, Enrich. What is the feedback coming in from that as well?
See, clean energy across the world is still under 20% of the overall energy basket. We do the statistical review of world energy along with the Energy Institute now in the erstwhile BP statistical review of world energy. And what we have seen is that fossil fuels are still been around 80% or a little above 80% of the energy basket. But having said that, I think the journey on renewables is now just picking up, and I expect in the next 4 to 5 years you're going to see the change in that statistic. It won't still be substantially removing fossil fuels, but at least renewables will become a good complement to fossil fuels. That's how we see it.
Anish, do you feel the need for more incentives for the renewables as a sector? And now, how has the private sector's participation been so far?
So two parts to it. One is that the overall renewable energy prices have held stable, but simultaneously, storage prices have come down. So that itself has caused a virtuous cycle on renewables and integration of renewables into the grid. So you don't have the same level of opposition from grid operators as you had on renewables, variable renewables earlier, because they can see that the storage is becoming a part of that integral energy delivery system at a cost point which they can afford. So that's one big change which has happened in the last 1 year. The second change, which I would say, is that the energy systems, including the renewable energy systems, are becoming much more complex. So what used to be vanilla investments in solar or wind, which was not attractive for many of the players, has now become complex energy systems, which includes storage, which includes other technologies like reactive compensation and so on. So you are seeing more sophisticated players coming into the market, and I can see that only increase. That's a good thing for the market, because then you will have new investor categories coming in rather than just this, investors who have appetite for vanilla investments. Eventually, over a period of time, larger energy players, including the international oil companies, who have been currently a little wary about renewables, I see them over a period of time coming into this complex systems on a much larger scale.
With that kind of a background, Anish, what sectors do you see adopting well to renewables and faster?
See, the metals, the heavies, the heavy industrials are clearly the immediate candidate, because they have a very large carbon footprint, which is on which they are getting challenged. So you will have the steel, cement, aluminum coming in. That's one part of it. But as we go forward, transport is going to get more and more electrified. Many parts of it are already getting electrified very, very quickly. But you're going to see others coming in, including hydrogen-based trucking coming over a period of time, the whole ethanol journey playing out. So renewables itself, the clean energy system, is becoming very diverse, and it is attracting different kinds of players. So it's kind of creating an ecosystem by itself, which didn't exist before. And as I said, it's not just about this, the renewable energy platforms who are playing in that alone, but various kinds of other investors are also coming in. Eventually, the major energy majors will also come into this game in a much larger way. In some sense, they are. Many of them are experimenting with hydrogen and so on. But they will come into this in a larger way. So the demand side is expanding, as we said, with the heavies, starting with the heavies and going into transport, but that's bringing in various elements of the supply side or various kinds of suppliers into this. It's become a much more diverse system.
All right, that's new, nice to know and assuring as well. Thank you so much, Anish, for joining us with that sense. But joining us now is Michael Hayes. Michael, I thank you so much for your time. What are your thoughts on global markets impacting the natural resources and renewables?
Here's one reality. Whether we like it or not, we are on a journey to a low carbon economy globally. And that's not just in China or India, it's all over the world. It is an imperative if we accept the thesis around climate change. And there's lots of other political developments around the world. Some are positive, some are negative, and clearly we've got some important elections, not just in the US, but in other countries around the world. And what's very clear to me is that the energy question, the availability of energy, number one, but also the connection of energy to the climate agenda are fundamental geopolitical issues. And governments are going to have to play a role in this. They're either going to play a positive role or a negative role. And I think future policies in this space are desperately needed if we're going to accelerate this transition. And therefore, we are looking for governments to step up and play a really, really critical role as we move forward.
And in that sense, what would you say, Mike? What are the policies that the governments need to bring forward in Asia, specifically India?
Well, one of the key points for me, Manisha, is that it's not just about individual government policies anymore. And let me explain what I'm talking about. The European Commission has actually taken the lead in bringing in new policies that are going to make a difference. And these are policies such as the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism and this thing called the Deforestation Directive. And even though these policies emanate from Europe, they impact companies all over the world who want to do business with Europe, with a huge impact on Asia. So I'll give you some examples. Asian companies who are involved in aluminium and steel production are now subject to this thing called the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, the so-called CBAM. And this is going to result in significant additional tax costs when these goods are imported into Europe. Now, it's undecided yet whether it's the final consumer will pay or whether it's the producer, but somebody's going to have to pay, and it is going to change the economic dimension. But what's really interesting about all of this, Manisha, is that, and CBAM is just a perfect embodiment of what's happening. Those companies that are impacted by this CBAM are going to have to decarbonize their supply chains and their operations. So these policies are actually leading to a very direct impact. And this is going to be very, very true in Asia, where we're going to see a huge push to decarbonize supply chains in Asia because of these policies emanating out of Europe. But it's not just Europe. Countries right across the world are introducing legislation. It's happening in Asia as much as anywhere else. It can, in some cases, it can be carbon taxes, even though that's a pretty controversial area, but it can be things like plastic taxes, regulations around batteries. I mean, there's a myriad of things. And it's very clear to me, as governments have been asked to step up their national climate policies, the only way they can do that is through policy intervention. And that policy intervention can be on the incentive side, but also it can be on the stick side, you know, but both are required if we're going to make progress.
Mike, you mentioned about various targets that corporates and countries have, but would you say that as the time moves on, we've seen these targets move as well on decarbonization?
Well, that's a pretty controversial topic at the moment. Let me just bring it back to the corporate level, first of all, Manisha. Corporates are on a trajectory to a net zero future, and a lot of them have made commitments for 2050 and 2030. Equally, countries have done the same thing. Here's a reality. The reality is that it is not that easy to achieve net zero. It's not that easy because it's a very expensive thing. The value proposition is not always clear cut. And unfortunately, while we've made fantastic progress on the technology front, there is more that can be done, and there's more vast new technology needs that we're going to need to decarbonize. So the timelines, I'm concerned, are starting to shift out. We are seeing corporates stepping back some of their commitments because of the sheer impossibility, and we're seeing the effect that AI and data centers are having on some of the technology companies. But this is where governments are now looking at this, and they're seeing those timelines being stretched, and they're saying that's not good enough. You know, that's why they're bringing policies in to really start to up the agenda and force change, particularly in the 5 or 6 years we've got left to 2030. Everybody's now thinking about how are we going to achieve interim targets, whatever they are, in some places it's 55%, in other places it's different percentages by 2030. And that's going to be a big part of the global narrative. It'll be discussed at COP29 coming up in Azerbaijan, but certainly as we head into COP30 in Brazil next year, with 5 years to go to the 2030 target, like, all roads lead to really upping the game at a government policy level, but also at a corporate level. And I would say, Manisha, it's not just corporates and governments. At an individual level, we're going to have to take actions as well, and governments will intervene in terms of what we do at an individual level.
Oh, well, yes, individuals to corporates to governments, perhaps everybody will have to move on when it comes to targets on decarbonization. And as Michael points out, from carbon taxes, plastic taxes, battery taxes, I mean, there's endless as a list that can be done when companies or other governments come to incentivize or give a stick, as Michael said. Thank you so much, Michael, for joining us on this broadcast. And with that, that's all the time that we have on Commodity Champions. Thank you for watching.